Hi everybody, welcome to Colorado Inside Out. I'm your host Dominic D'Soudy. Thank you for joining us. Let's get a quick take on the announcement from Coloradans for Responsible Reform that they have reserved nearly $8 million in a media buy in preparation to fight anti-fracking ballot issues this fall. Patty Calhoun from Westward, were you surprised by the $8 million number?
No, I'm not surprised by that. I'm surprised there is any media time left because you have all the candidates locking it up. You have all the fracking bills, both sides, and if there's a GMO ballot measure coming up, you will see huge amounts of money. That'll make $8 million look like nothing.
David Kolfer of the Independence Institute and DU Law School. When is the next time Colorado viewers are going to see anything from Rocky's Auto or Deal and Doug?
Surely the worst part of the campaign is how you miss those commercials for a few months. You know, I would say it'll be better than 2 years ago when it was like you flipped on daytime TV because you were at the auto dealers, and you know, on one of these innocuous apolitical shows, it was Romney versus Obama about who was more evil, and you know which one like actually was Satan versus one just works for Satan. So I'm hoping it'll be a higher level of discourse. And obviously the anti-fracking side is going to spend lavishly. Tom Steyer, the king of this whole thing, you know, $8 million for him is like me spending $3 for a pair of Mountain Dews at the gas station. And it's an example of how the wind lobby not only has to fight for its own subsidies, but in apparently their view, they're only economically viable if they go out and destroy all the other alternative sources of energy.
Ed Sealer from the Denver Business Journal. What do you think? Is it just a sign of more to come?
Oh, yeah. I mean, one of the things they told me was this is our first media buy. This is just targeted on television. That doesn't count any of the money they're spending on other forms of media so far. So the only thing that surprised me about it, I guess, was the timing a little bit. I thought maybe they might wait until we see if we're actually going to have a special session. But as they said, this was the other interesting thing. They said, well, that doesn't really matter to us because the proponents of Initiative 75, which is one of the two non-polis initiatives that could go on, the one that basically says a city or county can ban any for-profit business they don't like. They said, we have no indication they're part of these talks at the Capitol. They're going to go ahead with their ballot initiative. They get the signatures. We're going to be ready for it.
Susan Green, editor with the ColoradoIndependent.com. Wrap it up for us.
75, I think that's kind of the sleeper here. Nobody's talking about it because everybody's talking about the legislative deal. We have no idea how long they'll be talking about this legislative deal, if it'll even happen, if it's going to hang over everyone's head throughout the rest of this month and July. But in the meantime, there is this 75 thing. There are grassroots people who care about it. And I think if it doesn't get a lot of money, you know, there are certain ballot initiatives in the state that have not been super well funded but have been successful.
It's true, it can still make a lot of headlines. So it'll be fun to talk about around this table. Let's get to it. As Eric Cantor's surprising primary loss put immigration in the spotlight this week, both Senator Mark Udall and Cory Gardner came out with their own stances on reform. There was other big news in the Senate race, but let's tackle immigration and the effect of the Cantor results on the Republican Party, probably right here in Colorado. Patty, I know it was a primary race in Virginia. It's far away, but it is certain to send shockwaves. How do you think it's going to affect Republicans running here in Colorado?
Well, Republicans who are running polling firms have got to be very frightened because how off could a polling firm be? And a lot of these people all use the same Beltway polling firms, and they were off by, you know, just tens of thousands of votes. So bad. I mean, Eric Cantor thought he was going to walk right through it, and he did not. So first of all, everyone's got to be checking their polling numbers and saying, do they mean anything right now? I think in a lot of ways it's good news for Tom Tancredo that people are talking about immigration, they're thinking about immigration. There is a lot of energy on both sides with immigration. Anything that gets people out to the polls, people who are interested in immigration reform might split between the other three, and Tom might get more votes because of this. You know, right now he's polling fairly evenly with Beaupre. my cop doesn't seem to be making any inroads. I said something nice about his ad by Bill Armstrong last week, and this week I'm going to say with his Reefer Madness ad about Tom Tancredo that makes him look like he's toking up on every street corner. But he is the only gubernatorial candidate who's pro-legalization of pot. But it has really thrown any Republican primary. It's just crazy. It's thrown it to the wind right now because no one knows what numbers to trust.
David, as you look at it, is the Cantor upset, is that an anomaly or a canary in a coal mine?
Probably more to the canary. I mean, certainly the immigration issue wasn't the only thing going on in that election. But as with the recalls for the state senate in Colorado, they weren't only about guns. But on the other hand, if the gun issue didn't exist, those recalls wouldn't have happened, and John Morse would be finishing his second year as state senate president. And likewise for Cantor, that issue was the decisive against him. I think that the best analysis you can get is Ryan Saliza, who, like me, writes for the Washington Post, except they pay him, so he's higher ranking. He did an article in the New Yorker about the Brat upset, and said really what it most of all was people pushing back against this rigged two-party duopoly of corporate welfare, and the purpose of the middle class is to be milked so that it can subsidize big business, big labor, big whatever, and it's time to end that. It's time to end corporate welfare, and time to end a system where the fight between the Obama corporate welfare team and the Cantor corporate welfare team and is exactly which unions and which big businesses are going to get various shares of the loot. It's time to have the government, federal government, end its role as a kleptocracy.
Ed, when you look at the Republicans in Colorado, how are they reacting to the big Cantor upset?
Well, it was funny. Within an hour period, the day after the upset, 3 of the 4 Republican gubernatorial candidates each sent out press releases claiming that this shows that they're on a roll because Cantor got thrown out. The one who didn't was Bob Beaupre, who had Cantor's backing. But it's really difficult to say. I mean, one thing that's interesting is you have to look at kind of the lack of Senate primary here. I think this would be a wake-up call to that race if anyone was still running against Cory Gardner, but because he is seen as the establishment candidate. I don't think it is. In the governor's race, I don't know who this benefits. I mean, 3 people are claiming it. They're all the non-establishment. It's not Bob Beaupre, but frankly, this happening probably woke up Bob Beaupre's staff a little bit and said, hey, if that can happen there, it sure as hell can happen here. And they're probably out working harder to make sure the establishment gets out and votes. The interesting thing also is if you look at there are actually 2 contested primaries for congressional seats. Scott Tipton and Doug Lamborn both have challengers. If you say that this is, a low turnout election, it helps the Tea Party, Scott Tipton could be in trouble. David Cox, who is running against him in the 3rd Congressional District, is running against him to the right, is a Tea Party favorite. It's got to give him a boost. The interesting thing is Doug Lamborn is being pushed on in the 5th Congressional District by somebody who's not running against him on the right. Bentley Rayburn is running against him as everyone else has, suddenly saying, I don't think this guy knows what he's doing in Congress. And if the Tea Party influence benefits anyone in that race, it's actually the incumbent. So it'll be really interesting to see in all these races if there is any push.
Unique Colorado politics, as always. Susan, what do you think?
How it affects the governor's race, bottom line is nobody can out Tancredo. I mean, it's.
You may have just given him a new ad. That's pretty good.
That and, even Tancredo has been kind of sedate this primary. I mean, they've all been pretty sedate. Mm-hmm. And this race is taking place on talk radio, okay? I mean, they don't have a ton of money for TV. They don't even have money for radio ads. It's talk radio. So he's been talking about it, obviously immigration, all race. He's been talking about it for a decade, if not more. Mm-hmm. But it kind of upped his tenor. It seems to kicked in a little mojo. And so I think if you're listening, if you're trying to gauge, some space between these candidates, and there's very little space policy-wise, and it's just about kind of energy and enthusiasm and commitment to that issue, and you really care about that issue, it boosts Tancredo.
Wow. The Senate race stayed in the headlines as a National Mining Association poll released this week shows Gardner with a 2-point lead over Mark Udall. And on Friday, the White House confirmed that President Obama will be coming to Colorado to support Mark Udall at a fundraiser. David, I think most folks remember that the CNN reporter that put Mark Udall on the spot after the State of the Union speech of, will you be welcoming President Obama's support on the campaign trail? And he seemed to at least waffle uncomfortably to some. And then now President Obama's on his way. What do you think?
I think Udall threaded the needle very expertly. Same situation with Obama now as an equally unpopular president 8 years ago. That unpopular president, maybe independents don't like him, but the base of your party, the rich people, the rich base of your party will still absolutely show up at fundraisers and bring in a lot of money. And so Udall gets the money, he gets to check off the box, and now he can say, oh yeah, I campaigned with Obama. And at the same time, it's a lot better than trying to go out and do some rally in Pueblo or Broomfield, where there'd be a lot of people taking pictures of him with Obama. So perfect move by Udall. The National Mining Association poll showing Gardner up too. I think the truth is all these polls are within the margin of error, and so some will show one up or the other. But this poll, which is the first to show Gardner up by even a little, is great news for fundraising on both sides. It makes Gardner all the more credible, so he can go to the various folks and say, hey, this is a real race, invest in me. And likewise, as Udall's email from this morning does, it's great for raising panic among the base. So don't take this for granted. We could really lose. You got to get involved. So the political consultants on all sides and all the TV stations that will be the recipients of this ad money are just as pleased as punch with this wonderful new poll that will make everyone rich.
And I have to agree there with David that it really didn't pop on our radar here getting ready for Colorado Inside Out. If this was just a blurb in a paper or a website that this poll came out, no offense to the National Mining Association, which I'm sure are wonderful people, it wasn't on top of my list of polls to be keeping track of. But then when I saw the different letters come out from the campaign saying, oh my gosh, the sky was falling, someone's taking this seriously. What do you make of that and the Obama visit?
Okay, so two answers here. One, as far as the polling goes, I think this is important, but I think there are 3 polls that have been coming out lately that are more important. Those are polls in South Dakota, West Virginia, and Montana, showing those 3, all Democrats-held open seat races, are essentially over at this point. The Republicans are going to take back all 3 of those without investing much. And that means they can move farther down the line to who they fund. Most people had put the Gardner-Udall race at about number 8 on the most likely list to flip races. If they don't have to fund the top 3 on that list, suddenly instead of numbers 4 through 6 getting that money, now numbers 7, 8, and 9 are going to be getting a lot more. So I think this happening in conjunction with what's happening in other states means you're going to see a lot more money coming into here. Now, secondly, and Udall didn't say this, but here is my take. It's a little different than Dave's on what Udall did this week. I think that Udall decided he's going to run as liberal Mark Udall versus conservative Cory Gardner. I think by coming out against the Keystone Pipeline and embracing President Obama here, he was going away from the idea as we all know that he's running against the extremist Cory Gardner, but I had thought he was going to run as centrist Udall against him. I think this shows that he's going to go for the left side of the party more so than the independents. Figuring, one, not as many independents come out in a midterm election as a presidential election, and basically saying, I'm going to throw my base against your base, and we're going to see who's going to win. So, again, the campaign isn't going to come out and say that, but I think that was the decision that was made, and I think it will lead to do you like the left or the right in this race, rather than I'm going to run for the middle.
Susan, we have President Obama coming for a visit. We have a new poll. What do you make of it?
First of all, jumping off of what David said, we know this race is tight, so it's not huge news that there's a 2-point lead for Gardner. Number 2, I don't think the National Mining Association, I'm not sure who did the poll, but particularly has its finger on the pulse of the Colorado or American electorate. Number 3, the timing of the poll is interesting. It comes out right after this announcement of the Obama energy policy. And I think what it really shows, and the visit shows, is the kind of codependence between, it's not just a need for Udall or not need for Udall for Obama, there's a kind of codependence between the two. I mean, Obama needs to get his energy policy passed. He needs people to get it passed. So I think what you're seeing is as much a campaign for Mark Udall as a campaign for that energy policy.
Patty, wrap it up for us.
Well, Ed's point is really interesting because you think when that money starts pouring in for these Senate races, there will be no TV time left. So I don't know what it costs to sponsor Channel 12 and Colorado Inside Out, but I'm sure the Republicans would be very, very happy to do a big sponsorship of this show. But in the meantime, I think his point also of Udall going to the left is pretty interesting, but it's kind of the old Mark Udall. This was probably always going to be his last Senate race. I doubt he thought it was going to be a race like this one. Even back when he was talking to the CNN reporter, Gardner wasn't in it. He looked like he was in a little bit of trouble. He'd been tabbed with the Obamacare issue, but it was not the kind of race he's looking at now. So he needs all the help and support he can get from the Democratic Party, and it's going to come from the further left area where the money is.
Let's keep it rolling. Governor Hickenlooper and two of Colorado's largest oil and gas producers announced a new compromise on fracking late last week. Representative Jared Polis, who is funding 9 of the anti-fracking measures, is on board of the new bill as long as it is not changed in a special session. Critics have expressed concern over how this compromise will impact the greater business community and residents living near drilling sites. Ed, you've been reporting about this. This came out late last Friday. It's always our pet peeve. We tape Fridays at noon. Any news released at 3 o'clock on Friday just irritates the heck out of us, but we can cover it now. What do you think?
Well, I think we may have more news coming between the time this shows and the time we're filming. No, I mean, literally, if you hadn't made me turn my phone off, I would probably whip it out to see if I'd gotten any more texts about whether or not this special session is going to happen, because I was getting those late into last night from people saying, it's done, it's not going to happen. Now we hear today, no, the governor is still really trying and kicking on this. Look, in many ways, if this were your average bill, it would be dead, and nobody would be trying to push this through. But Hickenlooper has put more energy into this subject than pretty much anything I can remember in covering him as governor. He really wants to avoid both the ballot madness and the chances that it could really hurt the industry if you see some of the more extreme measures, the 2,500-foot setbacks going through on the ballot this year. But he's just running into a brick wall right now. You had the Oil and Gas Association vote to come out against this, despite their 2 largest members working with Hickenlooper on the bill on this. I've been told there is at least 1 Democratic senator who is committed to voting no on this. That's enough to kill it if the Republicans hold their caucus. I don't know. I mean, this is one that should have been over a while ago. But the one thing everyone I talk to says is Hickenlooper is pushing on this. He really believes compromise is essential. A compromise that Polis says would keep him from funding any ballot initiatives through 2018. And the general thought is without Polis's funding, initiatives are going to have a lot harder time getting through against the already $8 million fund that we've talked about earlier in the show. I will be really impressed if he can do this. I would say the betting money is still on no, but I can guarantee you that as we're taping, he is talking to people right now about this and isn't going to give up until he knows he doesn't have more chances.
Let's hope for no press releases this Friday afternoon, but keep our fingers crossed.
Dream on.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Susan. Dream on, indeed. What did you make of the developments from last week?
Well, we're a week out, okay? Friday, that was last Friday, it's this Friday. One thing I make is that this thing is like a Rorschach test. It's a bill, everybody's read it, and everybody seems to have a different interpretation about it. You know, every lawyer in the state, I think, who deals with land use and oil and gas has looked at it, and it's really unclear if it sets the grassroots back, if it sets oil and gas back. I don't think there's any consensus about the reality of the language. And frankly, I don't think the conversation is taking place about the content of the bill. The conversation is taking place, as Ed said, largely because Hickenlooper is pushing it. And it's also taking place because, truth be told, as pathetic as this may sound, these lawmakers want to go on summer vacation. Okay, they don't want it hanging over their heads all summer. And they're not happy about this. So they want a resolution.
Well, sure, we have a 5-month legislature, not a 12-month. Patty, any compromise is not going to make everybody happy. You have people on the oil side that aren't happy. You have activists on the environmental side that are not happy. But is there enough discord where Hickenlooper cannot make this happen?
Well, we were talking about this last week, and I think we predicted it wasn't. I predicted it wasn't going to happen. It is getting that ugly, and even though the language is kind of vague, so you can look at it either way, you can find problems with it, that also means people can say, oh, but we interpret it this way, we can take care of your concerns. So I think it's carefully phrased to be as vague as possible and work for everybody as much as possible. But I still think with the other ballot initiatives we've coming down the pike, we talked about 75, you talked about the one that could cause just as much trouble. They're going to be out there to fight that one anyway. So why not have 11 more?
David, some were chafing, really on both sides of the aisle, that this was a negotiation strictly with Jared Polis. And I would imagine he's not the last millionaire to come down the pike who's going to say, I'll do all this unless you do this. If you negotiate with one, you probably negotiate with others. What's your take?
Well, that's right. And you can negotiate. I mean, there's also, when you're John Hickenlooper negotiating with Jared Polis, since you're both major officials of the same party in the same state, there's a certain amount of leverage you have just in terms of being able to say party unity. Not always going to work, but it can. But Hickenlooper doesn't have that leverage back to Tom Steyer, who, by the way, could buy and sell John Hickenlooper and Jared Polis, with a single check. His money's makes theirs trivial. So if the anti-fracking people want to do something, they certainly do not need to go to Jared Polis for money. I think one thing John Hickenlooper might be considering, not inside information, just thinking logically, the personhood ballot initiatives that have been on the ballot, which have gone down to disastrous defeat, really activated a certain part of one side's base and brought out a lot of independents to vote no, and that cost people down the line, including probably Ken Buck, the Senate race in 2010. This anti-fracking stuff, the true anti-frackers just hate fossil fuels, period. And if you tell them, first it'll contaminate the water, and then they disprove that, and then it's on to the next thing, it causes global warming, and blah, blah, blah. They always have some pretext why they're against it. They're just morally opposed to fossil fuels. The majority of Coloradans aren't. And John Hickenlooper, even though he works hard to have a moderate position on fracking, could be taken down by the backlash against this extremism coming from one side, and of which Amendment 75, mentioned by Susan, is all the more extreme, which is basically nature has rights, but if you own a business, you don't.
Let's get a quick take on this one. Arapahoe County District Attorney George Brockler announced this week that he is dropping the charges against one of the voting fraud cases brought to his attention by the Secretary of State's office. Susan, you broke the story. Tell us about it.
Yeah, a year ago, the Secretary of State's office, after 3 years of warning us about rampant and a rash of voter fraud in the state, sent about 150 names to DAs across the state to prosecute, or at least investigate for prosecution for voter fraud. Interestingly enough, that 150 was down from early numbers when he took office of potentially 16,000 fraudulent voters in the state. So, it went from 16,000 to 150. The only DA in the state who prosecuted this was Brockler. There were 4 cases. 2 of them were against residents who are non-citizens, and 2 of them are against canvassers who are registering to vote. One was going to trial this week on Wednesday. I was on the phone on Tuesday with Brockler saying, asking about the case. It's a very flimsy case because there's evidence in it that shows that, in fact, the person registering the voter didn't fill out the form, even though that's the allegation. And while we were on the phone, he said, it occurs to me, I think I'm going to drop this case. So the news is, and the relevance is, after 4 years of hearing about voter fraud, the first case going to trial gets dropped, and I think that's a harbinger of what's to come.
Patty, your quick take.
Well, it's ironic. If we actually were talking about issues in the Republican primary, which we haven't heard much about, maybe we would hear a little more about some of Scott Gessler's obsessions as Secretary of State. I mean, he has managed to cut business permitting. I think it's a moratorium for a month. It's going to be down to $1 again because the budget's okay. But the emphasis on voter fraud investigations 3 years ago was incredible.
David.
Well, mainly knowing about this from Susan's excellent article in Colorado Independent, it looks like the Arapahoe DA made a mistake by prosecuting the canvasser and saying, you filled in somebody's name and information for them, when actually the handwriting samples showed that it was actually the criminal illegal voter, a person who was not a citizen who fraudulently registered to vote. And the DA made a mistake to say, we'll let you go if you testify against the canvasser, and the illegal voter should have been prosecuted. We do know in Virginia, just came out this week. I believe there's like 28,000 people who are double registered in Virginia and another state. In their attorney general's race, it came down to a few hundred votes. So the idea that fraud doesn't exist, I think, is might be naive.
Ed, wrap it up for us.
To Patty's point, the reason we're not actually hearing about this in the campaign trail now is because there would have to be one of the other candidates for Republican gubernatorial nominee who would have to oppose Gessler seeking out this fraud initiative. They're not. They're all in agreement here. So Gessler gets a pass on this if it's proven that, hey, this is not, the fraud isn't there that you were looking for, because nobody's going to say, well, I wouldn't have done it.
Less than 2 minutes. Let's go very quickly. Disgrace of the week, Patty.
There are more than 1,000 Denver police officers, and I'm sure most of them do a very good job. But the recent incidents in the press, the 7 partying, drinking, swinging police officers, it would be nice if they cleaned up their act.
David.
Iraqi President Maliki and United States President Obama, both, unlike their predecessors, are going to leave Iraq in far worse shape than it was when they became president.
Ed.
U.S. national team coach Jurgen Klinsmann saying, we can't win the World Cup, once again showing that he thinks this is about his personality, the same way he did when he dropped Landon Donovan, more than it is about this country's hopes for success.
Susan.
The state of Oklahoma disgraced with a report this morning showing that it used lethal injection in the wrong vein in a man named Clayton Lockett, who he wrote about consistently before he died because they were using an experimental drug on him.
Say something nice, quickly. Patty.
Local charity Peace Jam, which just had its movie on Desmond Tutu premiere in Monte Carlo.
Nice.
King Juan Carlos of Spain, who is retiring to be succeeded by his son. He was the essential figure in the transition from the Franco-fascist dictatorship into the solid democracy that Spain has today. I'd say the greatest king of the last century.
The host committee trying to bring the 2016 Republican National Convention here, which did not break out a live elephant or any celebrities. If we win this thing, we're going to do it the right way because Denver makes a case that it's the best city to host a big event.
That's right. We're not hosting a circus.
Steve Earle, playing Chautauqua last night, gave 60-ish people a really good name. It was a tremendous concert, and the man is producing music that's as good as his old music.
Cool. That's all the time we have tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to check out our latest Colorado Decides debate of the season later tonight at 9:30 as we look at the Republican primary in the 4th Congressional District. All 4 candidates showed up. It was a great debate. For our viewers watching our live stream right now, stay tuned for a special behind-the-scenes segment. And for our broadcast viewers, we'll see you next week. For everyone here at Channel 12, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thanks for watching.